And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara Divello, and I am delighted to host tonight the incredible Lynne Reeves, here to tell us all about her brand new book, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Lynne, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you. The Dangers of an Ordinary Night is my first novel of domestic suspense, and it combines the world of the theater with a crime that takes place outside a performing arts high school and the people that have to figure out what happened to two young girls who are abducted. And it also focuses on the notion of how addiction impacts people and families. So how does addiction impact marriage? How does it affect parenting? And what role does deception play in our relationships?
Ooh, well, as a counselor, I bet you've seen your share of duplicity. I can't wait to get into every single dirty detail. But first, I just want to welcome everyone who's watching. If you're watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on my channels, Murder by the Book, wherever you're watching from, you are in the right place. And we are here to get the scoop on this book. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. And if you're new, oh my goodness, oh, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Here's the drill. Every Monday for hashtag Mystery Monday, because you know Mondays can be murder, but we're going to make them a little less painful. I give you my hand-picked featured authors, and you get to ask them anything. This is your time. So ask the incredible Lynne about her writing process. Ask her about her editing, ask her about her ideas, ask her about real life crossing into the page life. We got a lot to talk about. So get the questions going and I will get them right over to her. And I see Leslie is saying hello from Canada. That's her signature Canadian hello. It brings me so much joy. Leslie, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us here tonight to welcome Lynne. Let us know if you have any questions for her. So, Lynne, let's get right into it. In your work as a counselor, you must hear some pretty tasty dialogue. You must hear some pretty crazy stories. Does that make its way, disguised, of course, onto the pages? How do you combine these two worlds? Give us the skinny.
Oh, well, thank you. I would say they absolutely inform one another, but not in a direct way. I really found over the years of counseling families that people talk in story. And what I noticed over time, seeing a number of families over and over again, new families, families returning, that family to family, the stories are thematic. And so when it comes to writing my fiction, I don't draw on my counseling clients, but instead what I draw on is the universality of those stories. You know, when a family is talking about the impact of addiction on their marriage and parenting, or what it feels like to be lied to, what it feels like to care deeply, but be disappointed by a person's relapse, those stories resonate and they are thematic. And so when you come to writing fiction, you can create a fictional narrative, but those themes can still really show up on the page.
Oh, interesting. Now tell us what you mean by families telling their stories. What does that mean?
Well, it's that people talk in story. You know, when we engage in any kind of connection with another person, whether that's with a therapist or it's even whether you and I are chatting, we talk in story. We talk about the people we love. We talk about the problems we face. We talk about the obstacles we bump into. And so really when you talk about anything, when the emotion starts to rise, when the story becomes deep and complicated, you're talking in story.
Ooh, do you mean that so when you say we're talking in stories, because I feel the truth of this, I notice that I do it, but do you mean that that we liken it to stories that we have read, or we just tend to develop a narrative arc just naturally as humans?
I think it's both of those things. I think we develop a natural arc. You know, the whole idea of telling a story around a campfire is you tell it in a way so people lean in, right? And that's the way we do it with one another. I mean, when someone tells you something that doesn't feel like a story, your attention wanders. So if I said I went to the store and I bought bread and milk, your attention would wander. But if I said to you I went to the store and I bumped into so-and-so, now it's a story, right? Now you're connected. Now you want to know more. And I think we live that way. So when it comes to fiction, I draw on the universality of stories, whether that's grief, whether that's societal issues, whether it's, in this case, I talk about social media and fame and celebrity and our desire to be known in that way. I talk about the issues related to long-term marriage and what happens when we stop seeing one another. Those are all things we talk about human to human, friend to friend.
I love that. I love that. And I feel the truth of that in my bones, all of it, both me, you know, that we tell stories to get people to lean in, that we develop a natural narrative arc. We don't just list the day as a to-do list. We tell it as a story, just naturally, innately, some deep, innate, primal part of us. As you said, telling stories around the campfire for millennia. And clearly your ability to tell a story is honed. Kirkus reviews raving that Lynne peers beneath every parent's worst nightmare. Reeves's uncommonly assured novel is by turns sensitive and scarifying. High praise there from the incredible Kirkus. Let's talk about how you did that. Balancing both the sensitive and the scarifying, a new word to me. I love that.
It was a new word to me too.
How do you, from a craft perspective, balance being sensitive and scaring the crap out of the reader?
Well, you know what? It's so interesting to me because I began writing this novel in the same way that I write all of my fiction, which is that it starts with character and it starts with a social issue. And when I decided that the characters would be in the world of the theater and struggling with addiction, and that would have an impact on their honesty with one another, the blind spots they bring to their relationships, I thought I was writing a novel like the ones that had come before, because that's sort of my DNA, character, social issue, trying to figure that out. But what happened was that the topic of addiction and all of the discussion that comes into play when people are struggling with it, the ways in which their mental related to addiction.
Okay. You're breaking up a tiny bit, but we're getting it. Okay. You were breaking up a tiny bit, but I think we got the gist of it.
Yeah. So I feel like what happened was that I started the story off in the same. Oh dear.
That's okay. You're back.
How about now? Okay. Good. So basically what I was saying is that I started off in the way I always do, but when I realized what was at play with the topic, I knew that the pace was faster. I knew that the stakes were higher. And I knew that instead of writing book club type fiction, which is what I had written before, that I was also entering into the world of psychological thriller, domestic suspense.
Okay. I like that you said, I knew that the pace was faster and the stakes were higher because of the subject matter. Yes. Laura Rossi, welcome to the conversation. Fabulous book publicist, book lover, and friend. Laura is saying she's reading it now. It is so good. And also, hi, Lynne and Sara. Laura, welcome. So good to see you as always. Tell us what you love about the book in the comments. Again, Lynne, dealing with this topic of addiction, something that is so timely. Now more than ever, something that so many of us can relate to, knowing someone, loving someone, going through that, or just seeing it in the news and feeling compassion. It must have been intimidating to try to address such a big and weighty topic. Or as a therapist, did you not feel intimidated by it?
Well, to be honest, I thought I was going to write a nonfiction book about addiction. And so I entered into a lot of interviews of women whose partners had struggled and the role of caretaker that they assume, and also the impact of a partner's addiction on parenting and on children. And I thought I was going to write a nonfiction book about it. But again, so many of the stories that I was being told had that universality to it, and yet was not prescriptive. I couldn't step in and say, this is how you deal with it, because there's only one way to do so, because there isn't. There are many ways. And so with a fictional narrative, the beauty of that is that it allows readers to examine what's happening in their own family or with their own friends or even in the news, and have a safe distance to explore it, right? There are so many wonderful narratives out there that look at this topic, and I don't think we can look at it enough.
My sister works in a hospital, and certainly everyone who works in a hospital is dealing with this in their client base. So again, such an important and topic, and interesting that you thought you'd write a nonfiction, but ended up writing domestic suspense. That's fascinating.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's when you let the story lead you, right? And so not only did the story lead me to fiction, but it also led me to a new genre. And that's really exciting as a writer.
How did you find that transition to this new genre? Easy, delicious, fun, intimidating, all of the above?
Oh, it would be all of the above. But you can never stop learning and growing. So the fact that the topic really created its own setting and its own atmosphere was really exciting to me. Now, of course, I had to learn the conventions of the genre so that readers will feel like they can sink into what they're hoping and expecting. And at the same time, I did a lot of character study, because it's really important to me to get relationships right. That's just really important to me.
I like that. I think as someone who has been, I think I've done 160 of these interviews in the past 19 months. One thing that I've noticed is the universality. And the most important thing I think about the genre is keeping those pages turning. And how do you do that? The New York Journal of Books raving that this is a true nail biter. So being new to the genre, how'd you do it?
So, again, I really, really like that campfire vibe, that idea that you really want people leaning in and you really want them sitting on the edge of the seat. And the way that is, the way that you achieve that, I believe, is to make people care about the characters. That's first and foremost. Flawed as they may be, I wrote a piece about, likability and flawed and what's the difference. And I think that characters need to be flawed, and whether you like them or not is up for debate. But whether or not you can see them as real people is critical. And so I think writing real people is important. I think leading characters toward resolution of their wants and needs. This particular book is told from 3 points of view. It's from a mother, it's from a psychiatrist, and it's from a detective. And while each of them have their own journey and their own path that they're on to try to figure out what happened, they each share something similar, which is that they've been betrayed by someone they love, and they're having a hard time trusting other people as a result of it. And that just added a lot, as you said, delicious. It added a lot of layers to what the narrative could be if they shared a common emotion, a common sadness.
Sharing a common sadness. I like that. George Beach tuning in from Texas. Welcome to the conversation, sir. Always a pleasure to have you, a true mystery connoisseur here in George. George, welcome as always. He said, welcome to the dark side, Lynne, coming over to our genre.
Well, it's true, though. The dark side for me in this story is that it's darker emotional terrain. It's the stuff we don't talk about. Addiction is something that we keep behind closed doors. We don't talk about the struggle freely. It's not the same as a medical condition, for example, where we would freely talk about a back injury or diabetes, but we are less willing to talk about mental health. We're less willing to talk about the struggle of addiction. And that is the darker terrain, is that which we feel we can't talk about.
Why do you think, as a therapist, and as a writer of this topic, why do you think we do feel that this is not akin to a back injury, a broken elbow, a broken arm? Why do we have that sense of shame?
Well, there's a long history in the addiction world, where people have struggled forever. This is a common issue, and it has been forever. But there was a lot of shame, because in the early days of even talking about addiction, the person who struggled was blamed. The person that struggled was deemed to be weak-willed, right? And it wasn't until many years later, and even now we're still struggling with that we understand that it's a brain chemistry challenge. It's a medical condition. It's neuroscience. And so now we have a lot more research that explains to us what's happening and why certain people are more vulnerable to it than others. Not everyone is vulnerable, but those who are uniquely vulnerable. And it isn't a question of character. It isn't a question of will. And so I think we don't talk about those things where shame is still attached to it, where keeping it behind closed doors is to say it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist, not this family, right? But it's really every family. It's every community.
Interesting. Another review that I thought was particularly interesting was from AuthorLink, saying that Lynne Reeves writes from the heart. Her experience as a renowned counselor informs her writing to create a gripping story of the consequences of family secrets. So let's talk about that. You writing from the heart. First of all, it must have felt very good to be seen, to have that work acknowledged in that way, to feel that you're putting something out there and to feel seen for it. How do you draw on your experience as a renowned counselor to write from the heart in this honest, painful way?
Well,
but also compelling.
Yes. Well, I think that, to be honest, writing, that was really a wonderful, wonderful compliment. It's, when you get certain reviews and you just think, that's the one. But to say that I write from the heart means a lot to me, because the topics that I choose to write about are those undiscussables. And I have experiences in my own life. I don't write memoir, but I do draw on my own personal experience. So I've had family members who have struggled with addiction. I've had family members who've struggled with mental health challenges. And so I do draw on what that feels like. I think the character of Nell, the mother in this story, she's very, very dear to me, in the sense that she's one of those people that assumes the role of caretaker and then can't seem to find her way out of it. She's caring for her child. She's caring for her husband. She's putting everyone before her. And she begins to lose herself as a result. And I know many, many women for whom that's happened. And I think in the pandemic, many women can relate with losing themselves to caretaking, right? So it's a resonant issue now. And I try to write from that space.
I love that.
Yeah.
Kathy, welcome to the conversation. A pleasure to have you back, ma'am. Saying the slide into mental health issues can be slow. Sometimes we don't realize it until much damage has already been done. So true. And yet we still see a reluctance to want and people wanting to get help, or even wanting to address those issues. Kathy, great.
And and in this particular story, I address that by examining how, when you're really, really close to people, it's also hard to see that slide. So I think Kathy's right. The slide happens slowly, and it's almost as if the closer you are to the person that you love, the harder it is to see it. Right?
Interesting.
So I think in this particular story, that led to the suspense, because things had been missed and things had been glossed over, and things maybe didn't have the same import until after a crime had occurred.
Oh, good point. Thank you for that insight. Hank Philippi Ryan, with whom you're speaking tomorrow, chimed in with a fabulous blurb, raving, shatteringly original, intensely suspenseful, and written. I'm going to pop this up just for a second because it's a big one. Written with a tender eloquence that will break your heart. The talented Lynne Reeves, a master of subtext, weaves her brilliant insights into a riveting story of best intentions, unintended consequences, and devastated families. So let's take this piece by piece. Tender eloquence. How does one pull that off on the page?
Well, that goes back to the heart, right? I want my characters to feel like people you know, and I want you to understand that even when they make mistakes, and even when they are really engaging in behavior that's, our worst selves, not our best selves, that there's still a little something about that character that can that can grab your attention. The character that is the hardest to like in this story is Zeke, the father of the teenage girl who struggles with addiction. And yet I've heard from readers already that they have compassion for him, even though he drives them crazy and he's making terrible choices. And that means a lot to me because, again, he's a human being. He's not setting out to be someone to dislike. He's making bad choices for lots of reasons. And so, again, that eloquence or around the writing from the heart. I want you to like my villain. I want you to I want you to feel compassion for his mistakes. And that's another, you don't have to condone his behavior, certainly.
I
But at
love
least
that.
you can understand where he's coming from.
Melissa saying, hi, Sarah and Lynne, joining us all the way from Australia. Melissa, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Mystery and Thriller Maven member there. Delightful to have you as always. Thank you for joining us. George chiming in saying there is still a lot of shame out there, even with all of the research, advancements, and understanding of mental health. With the resulting understanding and lessened shame, does anyone feel that some are taking advantage? For instance, look at me. I have that too. Be nice to me. Or I have this so I can get away with it. Lynne, thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I think there's always a pendulum swing, right? I think that I'm not sure I would really ever think that people use it in a nefarious way, but maybe in a way to get support and help. And I would say that if people in anyone's life come forward and say, I'm struggling with this, please help me, or please feel bad for me, I think I might, lean into that and say, how can I help? Because I think that people do well when they can. I think people feel emotionally well when things are going their way and when struggles aren't in their path. I think what I really tried to get at in this novel is that for the most part, people don't ask for help because they don't really know how. It's a very difficult thing to say you're struggling. And even though you may only be struggling in part of your life, one of the other things that is examined here in the characters is that they look pretty effective. They look like they're really managing quite well. It's only under the surface that some of them are not. Which is true of most people.
Yes, interesting. And I bet because I don't want to speak for you, George, but I have a feeling just because you're such a prolific reader and you join us for so many shows. Thank you so much. You're such a valued part of this community. And I bet because I watch a lot of true crime shows, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I read a ton of mysteries. There is a trend lately, and actually just saw this in one of the book groups I'm in today, where sort of the twist at the end is that the killer, the person, sort of the guilty party, the author assigns them a mental health issue, and that's sort of their reason. And the conversation in this group was, let's try another twist. Anyone else getting a little tired of this twist? Or sometimes we'll see on true crime shows that someone will plead, temporary insanity, but they kind of did know what they know what they were doing. So, or we'll see that in a fictional play. So I have a feeling that George is saying, what about those people who are taking advantage of the system? Of course, but I also agree with you, Lynne. Most people are not, of course, not taking advantage of the system. Most people are not even asking for help because the shame is too great.
Right.
George chiming in and saying, thank you for that answer. This is a new way of thinking about it. Thank you. Yay.
Good. That is wonderful. I think what I would want to have people realize is that when in fiction, a writer leans on the mental health condition of sociopathy, in other words, I don't have a conscience, right? And so therefore I can do anything and I'm going to surprise you in the end with that twist, right? That's not the kind of fiction I write. What I write is the nuanced idea that some of the mental health conditions that we experience, whether that's anxiety or depression or suicidality or any of these things, they put us in the path of making really, really bad decisions. And often those decisions, though there's a mental health condition involved, we're still responsible. We still are responsible for our actions. And so I like to explore that kind of psychology, that which is more nuanced and more gray, that there's no right or wrong, good or bad, but boy, is it complicated. To me, that's when it's interesting.
Interesting. I love that. Kathy asking Lynne, do you actually have one of your characters in this book ask for help in any way at all?
Yes, I have a couple of characters who ask for help. One who doesn't do it very effectively, and one who actually does, and actually plays out that role of asking for help quite clearly. There's a psychiatrist character in here, and I had a lot of fun as a family counselor writing her, Dr. Rollins, and she actually has her own struggles, you know. So she's not perfect. She's not proclaiming that she has all the answers, but she is trying to get across the message that women in particular have a lot of trouble asking for help. They have a lot of trouble saying, this is too much for me. And just because I can perhaps do these things doesn't mean I should. Just because I can cope with a lot doesn't mean I should take it all on in the absence of my own identity.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure to be superwoman. There's a lot of pressure to be super mom. There's a lot of pressure to be like, I juggle it all effortlessly. I never sleep, but who needs sleep? I rise with the dawn, and you know, I'm happy about it all day. And there's so much pressure to keep up this appearance of not needing help, of thriving and succeeding, and holding up this image of, you know, of perfection, and it's exhausting.
Absolutely. There's a couple of stage mom characters in this novel because it's set in the theater, and these stage mom characters are doing that. They're in competition for who can take on the most, who can handle their stress better, whose child is more talented, and that's just an enormous amount of pressure. And I think that the microcosm of the pressure parenting, the high pressure parenting that many women experience, that was something I wanted to tackle a little bit too. And the theater was the perfect place, of course, to do that.
Indeed, it is. Kathy saying that, quote, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Such good words. Kathy, thank you for that. Lynn, thank you as well. All right, y'all, we have 5 minutes left with Lynn. So any questions for her about her book, her characters, her process, let's get them going in the comments. I think we have room for 2 or 3 more. Now, while you're taking a moment to type, I'm going to share another review. This one from Elizabeth Brundage, the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Vanishing Point. She said, Dangers of an Ordinary Night, Lynne Reeves brilliantly demonstrates that in the theater of life, it is so often the people we're closest to who are the most convincing actors of all. Lies, deception, a marriage in disarray, and the ruinous consequences of long-kept secrets propel this novel to its tragic and startling end. So talking about following the story, again, you thought you were going to write nonfiction. Turned out you wrote a thriller. Did this ending surprise you, or did you know it all along?
I knew the ending all along. I definitely did, and that was helpful because as a person who's learning to write domestic suspense, and it's my first novel in the genre, it really helped that I knew what I was writing toward. Right, so I could raise those stakes and I could offer more tension and conflict because I knew where we were going to land. That said, the wonderful part of writing fiction is that even though I knew what the ending was, I didn't know a lot of the complex details of it. For example, who would be there? How many people would be present? Where was it going to take place, actually? And so that's where the fun comes. I knew what the ending was, but I didn't know all the nuance. And that's what really makes writing fiction enjoyable, is both the idea that you know where you're going and also that you have absolutely no idea where you're going.
Does that ever feel scary to you, or you have triumphed over the mere mortal experience of fear as a therapist?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit daunting at times, especially when you're dealing with the blank page. I'm much better in revision. Revision is, to me, just roll up your sleeves and now I can create the sculpture that I'm trying to create. But that blank page where I start, a first draft, that's always the most daunting because I keep thinking to myself, can I actually do this again? And then suddenly I do. I have a draft. And then I know that forever how long it's going to take me to shape that into what I know it needs to be and what it can be, I'm willing to do it. Revision to me is the ball game.
Wow, I love that perspective. I'm the opposite. I love a blank page and I hate revising.
Oh, we should partner.
We should partner, Lynn. Exactly. Wait, I have a theory. Do you like to bake or cook?
Cook.
Oh, okay. See, I'm more of a cook too because I don't like to follow the recipe. I like to throw a bunch of stuff in there. I can't be constrained by a recipe. I'm an artist. But I was thinking maybe you're a baker. You like to sort of get really refined. I didn't know. Um, yes, and I love the review from Renee. I'm not sure if it's Rennie or Renee Denfield, bestselling author of The Child Finder, raving both tender and tense. This novel trembles with the secrets lying under its many perfect facades. Lynne Reeves writes a thriller like no other, informed, nuanced, and forever keeping you at the edge of your seat. Grab this one. I absolutely love that. Again, so many of your reviews talk about that balance between tender and thriller, between kind and searing, just walking that knife's edge. A fabulous review there. And again, I want to remind you all to grab your copy tonight. Support a woman-owned bookstore.
Yes,
Woman-owned bookstore. Vote with your wallets. Every swipe of your credit card is a vote. So grab your copy. I'm putting the link in the comments right now. And there it is. So you can get your copy of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. By the way, I just love that title. It's so sexy.
Thank you. It's the first time I've ever titled my novel and that title stuck. It's the very first time. But I'll tell you what it refers to. The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, for anyone that's ever experienced when your life is going along swimmingly and beautiful and everything feels like it's all right. And then in the snap of a finger, it's changed. And something happens that you just cannot believe that you missed. And so that is the dangers of an ordinary night, is thinking that everything is fine when in fact it isn't.
Ooh, that's perhaps the most chilling of all. George saying, thank you so much, Lynne. I've got a new book.
Oh, thank you, George.
Sara, for another great interview. George, always a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your thoughtful contributions to the conversation. The last review I just want to share is from Erica Forensic. She's coming on the show in March. She raved The Dangers of an Ordinary Night is a riveting page turner that explores the many masks we wear. It's a mystery, a marriage story, and a great read on many levels. You won't want to put it down. Rave review from Erica Forensic there. And we can look forward to hosting Erica when her book comes out in March, everybody. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Lynne, for joining us. Thank you all mystery and thriller fans for joining us. And I will see you at the top of the hour with Gabrielle St. George, The Murder of a Marriage. Have a great night.